The coffee was already cold by the time I noticed Jonas hadn't touched it. He sat across from me at the same table where we had eaten breakfast for 6 years, his hands folded the way they folded before grace, except grace had already been said. The clock above the stove ticked the way it always ticked, too loud for a kitchen that small, and I remember thinking, the way you think something before you know why you're thinking it, that the room had gotten colder without the stove going out. He did not look at me. He did not look at our daughter, Ruth, who was 7 and humming to her oatmeal, unaware that anything in the house had changed. He stood, took his hat from the peg, and walked out to the barn without a single word. I was 24 years old. I did not know yet that this was the beginning of something with a shape, something that had happened to other women in other kitchens before mine, something that would not end for 111 days. I only knew that my husband, who had never in 6 years let a morning pass without at least telling me what needed doing in the fields, had looked through me like I was a pane of glass. I would learn, before it was over, exactly what Amish silence is built to do to a woman who is inconvenient. I would learn it the slow way, the way we learn everything, sideways, in kitchens, from women who would not meet my eyes while they told me. My name is Naomi. This is The Amish Wife, the channel where hidden Amish wife stories are told from the inside by the women who lived them. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, in a house at the end of a gravel lane with no address that meant anything to the English world. I married at 18. I left at 26. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have watched before, thank you for coming back to sit with me again. Before I go further, I want to ask you something, because I ask every time and I mean it every time. Have you ever been taught that saying "I don't agree" out loud was its own kind of sin? Tell me in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one of them, even the long ones, especially the long ones. And if this is the kind of story that matters to you, I hope you'll subscribe so the next one finds you too. I need to explain something first, because none of what happened to me will make sense to an outside ear without it. In my community, there is a thing called the Ordnung. It is not a document. You will not find it written on paper, filed anywhere, read aloud at baptism the way you might expect a rulebook to be read. It lives in the air of a district the way weather lives in a sky. You feel it change before anyone tells you it has changed. It governs everything from the width of a hat brim to the color of a buggy top to the precise number of pleats allowed in an apron. But more than any of that, it governs a hierarchy that is never questioned because it is never spoken. God above the bishop above the husband above the wife above the children, and beneath all of it, holding the whole structure up like a beam nobody can see, a word we were taught before we could read, Gelassenheit. Yielding. Submission not as an act but as a posture, a way of carrying your whole body through your whole life. There is another word, one used far less often but felt far more often, and that word is Hochmut, pride. In the outside world, pride is sometimes even a virtue, pride in your work, pride in your child, pride in yourself. In my community, Hochmut was the cardinal sin reserved almost exclusively, in practice, for women. A woman who spoke first. A woman who disagreed at a supper table with men present. A woman who wanted something, rest, quiet, a different answer than the one she'd been given, and said so. That was Hochmut. That was the sin nobody wrote down but everybody enforced. Everyone knows. No one says. Jonas and I met the way most of us met. At a school reunion singing when I was 16, in a barn strung with lanterns, boys on one side and girls on the other, in the arrangement that pretended not to be an arrangement at all. He was quiet even then, careful with his hands, the kind of boy who helped an old woman down from a buggy without being asked and never mentioned that he had done it. We married on a Tuesday in late October, the way many of our weddings happen midweek, so the work of the following days can still get done. 300 guests came, 4 hours of preaching before the vows were even said. Roast chicken, creamed celery, 7 kinds of pie laid out on sawhorse tables in a barn swept clean the night before. My mother had cried, the good kind of crying, she said, though I have wondered since whether there is such a thing as the good kind, for a mother watching her daughter step into the same yielding she herself had stepped into 30 years before. I want to be careful here, the way I try to be careful every time I tell one of these stories, because Jonas was not a monster. I need you to understand that, and I need you to sit with it a moment longer than feels comfortable, because it is the hardest and most honest thing I can tell you. He did not raise a hand to me in 6 years of marriage. He was not cruel in any way an outside person watching us at church would ever have named cruelty. He was a man raised inside the very same silence I was raised inside, handed the very same script I was handed, and he played his part the way I had played mine, because neither of us had ever been shown that another play existed. Our first child, a son, came within the first year, the way it was expected to come, and I loved that boy so completely and so immediately that I did not yet feel the walls of the life I had married into. Not yet. The trigger, when it finally came, was so small that if I told it to you plainly, without any of what came after, you would wonder why I am telling you a story at all. It happened on a Monday evening, at his brother's supper table. 11 of us crowded around a table meant for 8, the way our suppers always were. The talk turned to our nephew Elias, 19, and the pregnancy that had come before the wedding that hadn't come yet, and the bishop's decision that Elias would marry the girl within the month, regardless of what either of them wanted, because that was what covered the family's name. Jonas's brother said it was a fair decision, a merciful decision even, because it kept the girl from being shamed alone, and I said, I still remember the exact shape of the words in my mouth, how ordinary they felt going out. I don't agree. Nobody asked either of them what they wanted. The table went quiet the way a held breath goes quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a full stomach after a long meal. The other quiet. The one that has a shape to it, if you have ever lived inside a room that produces it. Nobody argued with me, nobody needed to. Word travels in a district the way water travels downhill, taking the path of least resistance through every kitchen it can reach, and by Tuesday morning my disagreement at another man's table had become, somehow, my husband's problem to correct in his own house. That was the morning of the cold coffee. That was the first day of the silence. I did not understand yet how long a man can hold a silence when an entire community is holding it up around him like scaffolding. The first days were only that, Jonas not speaking to me beyond what the running of a household required. Pass the salt. The horse needs shoeing. Nothing about me, about us, about what I had said or why. I told myself it would pass by Thursday. It did not pass by Thursday. On the 5th day, my mother-in-law arrived unannounced, the way these visits always arrive unannounced, carrying a basket of green beans she did not need help snapping and did not intend to snap alone. She sat across from me at my own table, her hands moving fast over the beans while she talked about nothing, the weather, a quilt she was piecing, her sister's arthritis, and then, without looking up from her hands, she said, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." She let that sit in the air the exact length of time it needed to land, and then she went back to the weather as though she had said nothing at all. I did not understand that yet. I would understand it a week later, when the visits from other women began arriving on a schedule I had not agreed to and could not seem to stop. His sister came next, over coffee, speaking in the coded way our women speak when a thing cannot be said plainly. She talked about a cousin of ours, 3 districts over, who had once made things difficult for her husband, and how that cousin's own mother had needed to speak to her, gently, about the cost of difficulty. I asked her what she meant. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has asked a question too big for the room, and changed the subject to her canning. Then, on the 12th day, the bishop's wife came to my door with a pie balanced on one arm, still warm, and sat in my front room saying nothing sharp at all, only soft things about family and harmony, and how we do not want to lose you from among us, which I would only later understand was not a comfort, but a warning dressed as one. A reminder of exactly how much I stood to lose, spoken in the gentlest voice she owned. I did not understand that yet either. I would understand it fully only much later, in a beige office 400 miles and 8 years from that afternoon, when a small English woman with reading glasses she kept losing gave me a name for what the bishop's wife had done. Coercive control, she would call it. But I am ahead of myself. That is a story for later in this one. For 11 weeks, Jonas did not speak a single unnecessary word to me. Our son, not yet 2, would toddle between us at supper, looking from his mother's face to his father's face and back again, confused by a silence he was too young to have a name for, but not too young to feel. That was the part that broke something loose in me that nothing else had, watching my child learn, before he could speak in full sentences, that there was a kind of quiet in our house that meant something was wrong, even though no one would ever tell him what. Then, on the 64th day, without warning, without apology, Jonas came home from the sawmill where he worked with a bag of horehound candy, the kind I had loved since I was a girl, and set it on the table beside my hand, and said in an ordinary voice, as though 63 days of nothing had never happened at all, "The Hostetler boy's mare threw a shoe on the north road. Took most of the afternoon." I remember how my whole body leaned toward that ordinary sentence the way a plant leans toward a window. I remember thinking, foolishly, gratefully, that it was over. We ate supper together that night with something almost like warmth between us, and I lay awake afterward wondering if I had imagined the last 2 months entirely, wondering if the cruelty had been mine in the noticing of it. The kindness lasted 4 days. On the 5th, the silence returned, colder than before, and I understood, though I could not yet have said it in these words, that the warmth had not been an ending. It had been a rest stop on a road that kept going the same direction regardless. It was around the 90th day that Lydia found me. Lydia Yoder was 71 years old, a widow 3 farms down who came to help at quilting bees, though her eyes had grown too weak to see the small stitches anymore, and she had a way of sitting slightly apart from the other women, listening more than she spoke. She found me alone in the wash house on a Wednesday, both of us hanging sheets in a wind that smelled like the frost that was coming, and without turning to look at me, without any greeting at all, she said, "They do not hit us. That is not our way. What they do is harder." Her hands kept moving, pinning a sheet at its corner. I lost one at the end. Nobody speaks of it, but I lost one, and I know exactly which day of silence did it. Then she picked up her empty basket and walked back toward the house, and she never said another word to me about it, not that day, not any day after, though we sat near each other at church for another 2 years before I left. I did not understand the whole weight of what she had told me until much later. That lost one did not mean what I first assumed it meant, that it was not a miscarriage she was describing, but something closer to herself, a version of Lydia that had once tried to leave, or tried to fight, or simply tried to disagree the way I had disagreed at that supper table, and had not survived that trying in any way you could see from the outside. She had gone on living, gone on quilting, gone on hanging sheets in the frost every autumn of her life since. But something of her, she was telling me, had not survived the last months of a silence like mine. I understood, standing in that wash house with a wet sheet snapping in the wind, that whatever was happening in my house was not new. It was not even rare. It had a shape old enough to have already taken something from a 71-year-old woman decades before I was born, and it would go on taking from women in this district long after I was gone from it, unless something in the pattern broke. If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. I know these stories are not easy to sit inside of, and I do not take it lightly that you have chosen to sit inside this one with me a while longer. If you haven't already, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. There is so much more of this I have not yet told. The turn that changed everything came not from Jonas, and not from the bishop, but from my own mother, 3 weeks later, at her own kitchen table, over a subject that had nothing at all to do with silence. I had gone to her, desperate by then, asking, not accusing, only asking, whether she thought this was right, what Jonas was doing, what the whole district seemed to be doing through him. And my mother, 60 years old, hands folded the exact way Jonas's hands had been folded that first Tuesday morning, told me that my father had done the same to her, once, for 11 months, when she was 26 and pregnant with my older brother and had asked to see an English doctor alone about pain she could not name to a man. 11 months. She had never told me. She told me now only because I had come to her raw enough that she could no longer hold it behind her teeth. "You survive it," she said, not unkindly, "the way water survives winter. You wait for the thaw." And I understood, sitting at that table, that the story I thought was about me and Jonas, and one disagreement at a supper table, was in fact a much older story, passed down through the women in my own family, like an inheritance nobody had asked for, wearing a different husband's face in every generation, but never changing its shape. That was the moment the ground shifted under the whole of what I had believed about my marriage. It was not that Jonas had failed me in some particular personal way that a different, better man might not have. It was that the entire structure I had been raised inside, God, bishop, husband, wife, had been engineered, generation after generation, to make a woman's silence and a woman's compliance indistinguishable from a woman's love. The bishop had told me, in his own visit not long after, in his warm parlor with a slice of pie waiting on the windowsill, that obedience was not a cage, Naomi, it is the roof that keeps a family dry, and I remember understanding, with a kind of vertigo, how sophisticated that framing was, how it made resistance to the roof look like a wish for the rain. The decision to leave did not arrive the way I imagine outside people picture it arriving. No slammed door, no declaration, no single dramatic scene. It arrived the way you know a season has changed. Some morning in early March, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Cold coffee again, though this time it was my own neglect and not his silence that had cooled it. Watching the snow come off the barn roof in long, wet ropes, dripping steady as a clock. I was hanging laundry that same week and found myself staring at the row of Jonas's shirts on the line, 5 of them, ordinary, mended twice at the elbows by my own hand, and something in me simply understood, the way you understand a fact you've always known, but never said aloud. I could not raise my son and my daughter inside a silence that had already, by Lydia's own account, cost one woman down the road something she never got back. I did not cry when I understood it. I only kept pinning shirts to the line, one after another, the way I always had. Even having decided, I did not leave for another 4 months, and I want to tell you honestly about the obstacle that held me there, because I think it is the part that gets skipped over too quickly in stories like mine. It was not fear of Jonas. It was my son. He was not yet 3, and the thought of what leaving would cost him. A mother without a district, without a husband, without the only community he had ever known folding around him at every gathering, sat on my chest at night like a stone I could not roll off. There was a week in early June where I very nearly stayed for good, sitting up at 2 a.m. with him asleep against my shoulder, telling myself that maybe the silences would grow shorter, maybe I could learn to survive the winters the way my mother had survived hers, the way Lydia had survived whatever she had survived. It was only when I noticed my daughter, then 7, saying, "I don't agree," to her little brother one afternoon and immediately clapping her own hand over her mouth, eyes wide, waiting to be corrected for it, that I understood staying was not the safer choice for either of my children. It only felt safer because it required nothing new of me. I will not tell the story of the leaving itself today, because it belongs to a different video, one I have already told in full elsewhere on this channel, the single suitcase, the walk to the phone shanty before dawn, the Mennonite woman in town who had helped 3 other wives before me, and asked no questions I wasn't ready to answer. What I will tell you is what came after, because that is the part people understand least. The shunning was not loud either. It was letters returned unopened, my name unspoken at gatherings I no longer attended, my mother's face the one time I saw her again in town, looking through me the way Jonas had looked through me that first Tuesday morning, as though I had become the pane of glass I had once only feared becoming. My father did not look at me at all. I called the house once, from a payphone outside a gas station in a town I did not yet know the name of streets in, and let it ring 9 times before someone lifted the receiver only to set it back down without a word, and I stood there in the cold with the dial tone humming against my ear for longer than I should admit. Even now, 3 years out, my body has not entirely believed I am safe to want things. I still ask permission before I buy anything, even small things, even for myself. Some old reflex reaching for a hand that is no longer there to grant it. I still flinch, some part of me still braces, when a phone rings unexpectedly in the evening, the way ours used to ring with news I had learned to be afraid of. I apologized to an English cashier last winter for taking too long counting change, though she had said nothing, though there was no one behind me in line, though nothing in that moment required an apology at all. The system does not leave you the day you leave the district. It leaves you the way frost leaves a field. Slowly, and not all at once, and sometimes it comes back for one more morning, just when you thought the ground had finally softened. It was in a small office with a plant on the windowsill, and a woman named Carol, who kept losing her reading glasses in the folds of her own cardigan, that I first heard language for what had happened to me. She called it coercive control. She told me that consent given because the cost of refusing it has been made unbearable is not really consent at all. It is compliance wearing consent's clothing. She told me that emotional withdrawal used as punishment has a name, and it is not discipline, and it is not love, no matter how many generations of women have been taught to call it that. She said something I have never forgotten, and I offer it to you now the way it was given to me. The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. And she said one more thing, quieter, near the end of that first hour together. A community that cannot hold your questions does not actually trust its own answers. I want to say again, because it matters more the further into this story we get, that I do not hate the Amish. I do not hate my mother, who survived her own 11 months the only way she knew how. I do not hate Jonas, who was handed the same silence I was handed, and never once, in his own accounting of his own life, understood himself to be doing anything but leading a family the way a good husband was supposed to lead one. The system is the thing, not the people caught inside it. That community gave me a work ethic that has served me every day since. It gave me a faith I have not entirely set down, even now, even changed. It gave me sisters, real ones, women who loved me inside a structure that never once asked whether that love left room for me to breathe. I carry all of that forward with me. I have simply refused, finally, to carry the silence forward too. If you grew up in a place where your body was not entirely your own to speak for, I see you. If you ever sat at a supper table and swallowed the sentence that was true because you already knew what it would cost you to say it, I see you. If you were ever taught that being a good wife, a good daughter, a good woman meant making yourself smaller and smaller until there was nothing left of you large enough to refuse with, I see you. You are not weak, whatever silence you are sitting inside of tonight. You were surviving inside a system that was built, brick by unspoken brick, to make sure you could never say no without paying more for it than seemed fair. That was never a fault in you. The framework was the mistake. It was never you. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you tonight. And if you are ready, tell me your own story in whatever words you have for it. I read every single one, always. If this found you at the right moment, I hope you'll subscribe to The Amish Wife, because there is so much more I have not yet said, and I have a feeling some of it belongs to you too. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.